Hello, everyone. My name is Kristen Oden, and my internship is at the Domestic Abuse and Sexual Assault Crisis Center of Warren County. The mission of the Domestic Abuse and Sexual Assault Crisis Center of Warren County, or DASACC for short, is their mission statement is to help serve and advocate for those impacted by interpersonal violence, to be proactive regarding its prevention, and to create positive change. DASACC hopes to empower those affected by domestic violence and sexual assault and aims to create a community where there is no tolerance of either. Just a side note, interpersonal violence does not have to be just between boyfriend and girlfriend or husband and wife. It can be father and child, mother and child, violence between siblings, and so on. Also, domestic violence does not have to mean physical abuse. It can mean verbal abuse, financial abuse, or destruction of property, or someone harming your pets, anything like that. DASACC uses the NASW Code of Ethics as their own, so they directly follow the Social Work Code of Ethics, which I think is really interesting. DASACC also operates using the empowerment model, which aims to empower clients to make their own choices and decisions to better their lives. So they're not telling, these victims of domestic violence to actually leave. They're not telling them. They're giving them the options and the tools that they may need to make that decision for themselves. Directly from the reading, the choices made about theory determine whether social workers function as agents of social control or empower clients to make the change in themselves, their situation, and social structures. So DASACC is actually on the side of empowering the clients to make that change in their own lives, changing their situation, changing their relationships, things like that. As far as target population is concerned, there really is no target population when it comes to domestic violence and sexual assault. Anyone of any race, ethnicity, religion, age, etc., can be a victim of interpersonal violence or sexual assault. Domestic violence and sexual assault does not discriminate based on any factor. At DASACC, they see individuals of every population. The stigma is that most domestic violence or sexual assault victims are female, but that is not always true. There are male victims and victims of all races and sexualities. DASACC offers many services. They have a 24-hour emergency shelter, which would fit into Quadrant A from our exercise. The emergency shelter is in a non-disclosed location, so no one knows where it is except for DASACC staff, interns, and obviously emergency services. It's available for those that need immediate shelter from their abusers. There are 15 beds in the shelter, and if the shelter at DASACC is full, they can advocate out to other shelters to find beds for victims, so they never turn anyone away that's seeking emergency shelter. There's also a 24-hour hotline, which is a number clients can call for any reason, from anything from needing the emergency shelter to seeking counseling appointments or seeking legal advocacy. DIVERT and SART, DVRT and SART, which are the domestic violence and sexual assault response teams, also fitting in Quadrant A, are when an advocate needs to be called out for either domestic violence or sexual assault call. They will actually go out to the hospital or police station, whichever it may be, and be an advocate for the victim that's experiencing that situation. Legal advocacy is a service mostly used in DASACC to provide information on restraining orders and whether or not they are a good option for a specific client. Sometimes it's just not safe enough for a client to get a restraining order, or there could be other reasons why it wouldn't be a good idea. So there's actually a legal advocacy specialist that can help clients decide if that's a good option for them or not. Individual and group counseling, also in Quadrant A. That's pretty self-explanatory. It can be counseling for the entire family or just the victim, and they can come back every week for counseling, or they can only do it once, or whatever they see fit. There's also trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy for children. This is for the children who are either experiencing the abuse themselves or have witnessed the abuse in their families. Community outreach can involve anything from fundraising events, like for example, next weekend they're doing a dog walking event called PAWS, P-A-W-S, for domestic violence. So that's some of the events that they do, or it can be spreading awareness to the local high schools and colleges. There is a long-term case manager at DASACC who will help clients find jobs or apartments once they're at that level in their maybe right after they've gotten out of shelter or right after they've left their abuser. The long-term case manager will help them find those things. Clients may also receive information about government benefits and things like that they may be eligible for. The volunteering program, I think, would fall under Quadrant D because most of the volunteers are helping with community outreach. However, there are extensively trained volunteers who are allowed to go out on DVRT and SART calls. Transitional housing is usually the next step after an individual leaves the shelter. It's completely independent living and a place for them to utilize while they save some money and get back on their feet. Also in that house, with a separate door and everything, is the Wardrobe of Hope, which is open during certain times of the week, where members of the community who may be struggling can come get free business clothes that they can use for business interviews and things like that. As far as ethical issues are concerned, there is like almost no men on the staff at DASACC. It's like 98% female. I've actually only met one male staff member. And I feel like this could be an issue because it may be more empowering for a male victim to speak to a male advocate. And there are not many men in the agency or even on the volunteer staff for that matter. The 24-hour emergency shelter is also just for women and children, and they don't accept men. However, they can advocate out to the shelters that do accept men to get a man in a shelter if he needs to, or they do have the option of setting up the man in a hotel room for a few days fully paid for until he can find alternate housing or someone he can stay with or something like that. Learning challenges. With sexual assault calls, you typically only see the client once, and that's right after the sexual assault happens. Just because sexual assault isn't like domestic violence, whereas domestic violence is usually going on for a long period of time. Typically, not always, sexual assault is usually, it usually only happens once, unless it's something that's going on continuously, but that's another thing altogether. Hotline calls have been pretty challenging because you're dealing with people sometimes who are calling who are right in the middle of crisis, and you really have to know how to stay calm and keep your head because you need to be the one that's level-headed because they're the one experiencing the crisis. But it's really hard not to take on that adrenaline rush yourself. I don't have a lot of knowledge about the legal aspect of all of this either, so that's been a learning challenge, learning about restraining orders and consent orders and things like that, to be able to at least help clients decide if that's a good option for them. And just crisis and trauma in general. Starting this, the agency actually requires that all interns and volunteers do 60 hours of crisis training, which I'm kind of in the middle of right now. It goes twice a week all the way through December 7th, so I'm still learning about how to deal with some of those issues. As far as making a referral to DASACC, typically clients are acquired through the 24-hour hotline. They'll call themselves and ask about counseling or ask about if they can speak to someone about restraining orders. They may be referred during a divert or SART call. That's when an advocate would actually go out and tell them about our agency and give them the options. They can call the agency directly at this number and find out any information that they need and reach out to any of these people. Pam Drager is like she's kind of oversees everything. She used to do more of the counseling side of it, but now she's more of the community engagement manager. Haley is the DVRT response team coordinator, so if it's domestic violence related, she's going to be the one that knows the most about that. Lauren is the sexual assault response team coordinator, so if it's sexual assault related, she is the specialist with that. And then Matt is the community education coordinator, and there's also a legal advocacy specialist. Her name is Hyatt, and she would be the one that would actually go to court and advocate with the victims through the court system. So that's pretty much my presentation on my current field placement. It's been really interesting so far. I've enjoyed it really thoroughly, and I look forward to continuing to learn about domestic violence and sexual assault.